And we're continuing with the 10th chapter of Dragons in the Waters, which is called The Body in the Hearse. Polly and Geraldo sat in the small shade up on the boat deck. The heat of port was so heavy, and the breeze of the open sea, after the breeze of the open sea, that even Dr. Wordsworth had given up her daily constitutional. Despite the shade, the white-painted wood of the bench was hot against Polly's bare legs. "Oh, Harold." "Oh, Harold," she said. "Things are so strange and my emotions are so mixed. If nothing had happened, Daddy and Charles and I would have left the Orion forever, and you'd be getting ready to go on to Aruba and Caraco and wherever you go before Liguria. And the portrait would still be in the cabin, and Cousin Forsyth and Simon would still be on board, and Simon wouldn't be off with that oily policeman to meet Aunt Leonis, and yet I can't bring myself to wish that you and I weren't sitting here being comfortable together." Geraldo leaned toward her and kissed her. When they moved apart, she said, "I am gorgeously happy. How can I be happy when someone has been murdered?" "I should not have kissed you," Geraldo said. "Forgive me." "Why shouldn't you? Because you are still a child." "I am not." "And I am in no position to, you understand, Polyhymnia. Sooner or later, you will leave the ship, and we will never see each other again." Polly gave him her most brilliant smile. "I know, I can be quite realistic, Geraldo, but this was my first kiss, and I will never forget it, ever, not when I am as old as Aunt Leonis." "I will try to be realistic, too," Geraldo said, but he would have kissed her again had not Dr. O'Keefe called up to them. Polly jumped guiltily. "I think Daddy feels he has to keep track of us all." Geraldo touched her cheek lightly with one finger. "I want him to keep track of you." "Geraldo, you have any ideas?" He leaned toward her. "Many." No, silly, about Cousin Forsyth and the portrait." "There are murmurs about Jan, but I know that it is not Jan." "Of course not. Jan wouldn't murder." "But we know his interest in the portrait. And there is his lie about the key, the crew, everybody. We are all very disturbed. Most of us have worked on the Orion for years, and no one is on ship for the first time this voyage. We find it impossible to believe that there is a murderer among us. But I heard Mynheer Boone defending Jan to Mynheer Runci." "What about the passengers?" "It is not you or Charles or your father or Simon," Geraldo said firmly. "Mr. Theo, Dr. Eisenstein, Dr. Wordsworth, the Smiths, not one of them is strong enough to have got Cousin Forsyth into the hearse. Possibly two could. Mr. and Mrs. Smith certainly couldn't. The lady doctors." Polly pondered this. Dr. Wordsworth looked strong enough. Wouldn't they have looked suspicious? Anybody would have looked suspicious if seen. It would be rather difficult to lug Mr. Fair from cabin 5 through the ship, out on deck, and into the hearse without being seen. "He may not have been killed in the cabin." Polly fondled Geraldo's hand. "If I were the murderer, I think I'd have tried to lure Cousin Forsyth out on deck, get him behind the hearse or in one of the big packing cases, right by it, and done him in there so that I could have got him into the hearse inconspicuously." Geraldo raised her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers. "You look so funny and adorable playing the detective." "I'm not playing." "Sorry, Poliquita, sorry." He kissed her lightly and rose. "I have work to do, and you must go to your father." She stood too. "Simon and Aunt Leonis ought to be here soon, and my godfather. I know it's childish of me, but I keep feeling that when he gets here, everything's going to be all right." "May it be so," Geraldo said. Simon and Canon Tallis watched the helicopter disappear up through a tangle of leaf and vine, trailing long shards of greenery on its runners. The rotors chomped through the entangling jungle until the machine was free and high in the sky. They had been dumped unceremoniously in a small clearing, which would be visible from the air only to someone who already knew about it, and who was a superb pilot. "In a cinema," Tallis said, "we'd have overpowered them and taken control of the copter." "What would we have done then?" Simon asked. "Could you fly it?" "I'm woefully out of practice, But I do have a pilot's license, and desperation can be a good co-pilot. That man knows his jungle, and he knows his machine. Unfortunately, they took my gun at the airport before they tied me up. You had a gun? Something told me to be prepared. However, it seems that I was not prepared enough, or we wouldn't be here. Sir, are you all right? Simon asked. Canon Tallis rubbed his skull. I have a nasty egg here, which will probably be a brilliant hue of purple by morning, but otherwise I'm fine. I thought he'd killed you. For some reason, he only wanted to knock me out, and that he succeeded in doing, but no other harm done, thank God. Green of leaf and vine hid the helicopter, though they could still hear the roar of its blades. Then, sound too was lost in the enveloping murmur of the jungle. A bird startled Simon with a scream. Deep within the tangle of green and brown and olive came a chattering which sounded like monkeys, and probably was. Simon asked, Why did they just dump us here in the middle of the jungle? I think you're a little fat man. El Señor Jefe de Policio Gutierrez? El Señor Gutierrez, for some reason, did not want to kill us outright. Odd how squeamish some types can be. The thug with him would much have preferred to shoot me than knock me out, put a bullet through you, and then leave us here for the vultures. What are we going to do? Simon asked. Try to survive until Hurtado finds us. Will he find us? Hurtado is one of the best policemen in the world. If anybody can find us, he will. Miss Leonis leaned toward the window of the little one-prop plane and watched the landing at Port of Dragons. Despite her exhaustion from the trip, the bus ride to Charleston, the long flight to La Guaira with a change of plane en route, and the bumpy trip in this old crate, she was excited. She peered out at the stretch of beach beside the runway, full of flotsam and jetsam, driftwood, and, as they came closer, and she could see better, old sandals, tin cans, empty bottles. The water looked yellow and rough. Then the ground came up to meet them, and they bounced several times and lurched to a stop. Her ancient heart was beating too rapidly. She could feel a flutter in her throat, as though a small and frightened bird was caught there. Her hands, despite the heat, were cold. Several solicitous officials helped her from the plane and set her down on the airstrip. She looked around. She was glad that she had not seen the bird's nest in the windsock while they were landing. It hardly gave one a sense of confidence. Close to the plane was a low shack, and through the open door she could see a large set of scales, a soldier with a submachine gun, and two other semi-uniformed men with rifles. The three of them were playing some kind of card game, slapping cards and silver down on the table, which was spotlighted by the sun and looked even hotter than outdoors. She felt a presence at her side, turned, and one of the officials who had helped her from the plane was bowing obsequiously. He was rotund and shiny with heat. Miss Fair, she bowed in acknowledgement. Señor Jefe de Policio Gutierrez of Port of Dragons Police at your service. She extended a white-gloved hand, and he kissed it. I am here to escort you to the Orion, where you will be joyfully reunited with your nephew. He led her to an official-looking car with a gold seal on the door. If you will be so kind as to sit in front with me, perhaps I can get some preliminary questions out of the way on the drive to the ship. She did not like him. Her heart continued to thud. The car was stiflingly hot, smelled of stale cigar smoke. As he closed the door for her, she decided that she was much too tired to speak Spanish, and so she sat and smiled courteously and vaguely at El Señor Jefe de Policio Gutierrez as he started the car and drove off, immediately firing a barrage of questions at her. It took him some time to realize that she was not going to respond. Then he hit his forehead with the heel of his palm and moaned, as though to one of his minions, "But she is supposed to speak Spanish!" The corners of Miss Leonis's mouth quirked slightly. She leaned back in the car and closed her eyes, making a concentrated effort to relax her travel-top muscles, to slow the rapid beating of her heart. If she was to be of any use to Simon, she must rest. Slowly and rhythmically, without moving her lips, she began to recite poetry to herself. Shakespeare's sonnets, her favorite psalms, the prelude to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Her head drooped forward, Then she slid out of poetry and into a light slumber. She paid no mind to El Señor Jefe de Policio Gutierrez. Defeated by passive resistance, he drove on. And we'll pause there.